What's up, Taiwan? I'm Erika Liu with news from here in Taiwan and around the world. Firefighters and police in Taiwan could get the right to form unions. That's if a proposal from Taiwan's opposition parties get traction. The Kuomintang and Taiwan People's Party say it's time to revise the country's Labor Union Act. First responders are considered public servants and are not allowed to unionize. But there's been a fresh push to change that since a factory fire that killed 4 firefighters last year. The ruling DPP has argued for letting first responders form special associations rather than unions. But both firefighter and the opposition have rejected the idea, saying such associations wouldn't offer the same protections as a union. Power shortages are complicating work to rebuild Taipei's aging housing. As John Van Trieste reports, it's just the latest problem with Taiwan's strained and fragile grid.
In Taipei, last month's magnitude 7.2 earthquake has put fresh attention on an old issue, the need to replace aging buildings. Over 70% of the city's housing is more than 30 years old, meaning it predates today's strict building codes. But the state of the power grid could dampen demand for new builds. A planned substation has been delayed for years, putting pressure on the power supply in parts of the city. Yet demand for power keeps growing in these same areas. The state-run power company wants to make sure existing customers don't lose out as new housing goes up. So, new builds will need to install a remote switch that will shut off the supply when needed, provided they use more than 100 kilowatt hours. Almost all new builds will be affected, as the average household uses up to 3 times that amount. Each switch costs over $6,000, adding to the cost of buying. The power company says this is a necessary move. But this means buyers will have to pay steep Taipei prices for a home that might not even have reliable power. The substation that will relieve the pressure isn't expected until the end of 2025. On the street, views about the policy are mixed. The real estate industry, though, says the program won't impact demand for high-end builds too much.
This
is just the latest facet of a long-standing energy crunch in Taiwan. The country is a tech and manufacturing center with high demand, but it relies on imported fossil fuels and is working to phase out nuclear power. The grid's also suffered a series of malfunctions in recent years, leading to blackouts in urban centers like Taipei. These power problems will be among the biggest tests the incoming Lai Ching-te administration will face. Scott Huang and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's space agency is planning to launch 6 low Earth orbit satellites from 2026. The move is part of efforts to strengthen the country's emergency communication system in case of crises. The agency says it'll also bolster the country's space industry. Taiwan currently relies on 15 subsea cables for connectivity, which are vulnerable to being damaged or cut. The program aims to gain uninterrupted coverage, which would require at least 120 satellites. To learn more about Taiwan's communications satellite program, reporter Chris Gorin spoke to analyst Zhi Xiangxu from the Institute for National Defense and Security Research.
The Taiwan Space Agency, or TASA, has just announced that they plan to launch 6 new communication satellites starting in 2026. What are Taiwan's current satellite capabilities like, and why is TASA focused on these communication satellites right now?
The Taiwanese Space Agency, the TASA, is actually a 30-year-old organization, but the Taiwanese government is focusing on space development just, since recent years. The government put much more budget than before, so we don't really have a lot of satellites, but more than 1,000 we have. And they are mainly so-called weather satellites or Earth observation satellites. Communication is actually one of the most critical elements in the modern society. In particular, all our technological life in the future will highly rely on internet. If you look at the battlefield in Ukraine, you will find that the SpaceX and its Starlink system play a crucial role to support the Ukrainian government and society and military survive from the war and maintain the basic function of the whole society, like financial, hospital system, and so on.
TASA's plan is to build its own domestically made satellite communication system similar to SpaceX's Starlink. But SpaceX already has the industry-leading system. Why not just use theirs?
In our telecommunication law, the Taiwanese government asked a foreign company to create a joint venture in Taiwan, and the Taiwanese government or Taiwanese stakeholders should have more than 50%. For the Taiwanese government, that is quite important to make sure, even in the most critical time, the system could still work. But the SpaceX want to hold the whole 100%. So in that sense, I think there are still no consensus between Taiwanese government and SpaceX. That is also the reason that the Taiwanese program of communication resilience choose OneWeb instead of SpaceX.
Speaking of OneWeb, the satellite company from the UK, their systems were recently used during rescue operations after the earthquakes in eastern Taiwan. How useful are these systems during natural disasters?
Well, I think that is quite critical, just like in Ukraine, because in wartime or in natural disasters, many infrastructure might be damaged or be destroyed. In this emergency time, to maintain the communication is the most critical things. So in that sense, this kind of a new space communication system like OneWeb or Starlink will be very important for the rescue and also for the rescue mission and also to keep the whole society works.
The head of TASA announced 6 new communication satellites, but how many would it take to make this a reliable system that would work even if China or anyone else tried to interfere with it?
Well, actually, if you look at the Director General Wu Zongxin, what he said before, actually we need at least 50 or 60 satellites. But now we know that they claim for maybe 100 or 120. That means for the resilience, we need more than 50, 60. Because we need redundancy to make sure the whole system will work even with some jamming or even with some, anti-satellite technologies and so on.
That was defense analyst Zhixiang Xu speaking with our reporter Chris Gorin. Quake-hit Hualien City is helping traditional market vendors stay afloat by cutting rent fees by up to half.
为期会到半年，那以复兴来讲的话是2个月，5成降5成。那可能之后其他的市场都会以减租3成的部分，一直到年底。
The city's markets have seen a sharp drop in customers since April's magnitude 7.2 quake, with several vendors packing up. 2 markets were heavily damaged and will be closed for 4 months for repairs. The city will set up temporary markets with lower fees for those vendors. As President Tsai Ing-wen prepares to leave office, we take a look at one of her major policy pledges, justice for victims of Taiwan's past authoritarian government. Jeremy Olivier reports on some of the progress she's made and what survivors say still needs to be done.
92-year-old Tsai Ing-wen is one of the few remaining survivors of Taiwan's White Terror, a decades-long period of political repression and suppression by an authoritarian Kuomintang, or Chinese nationalist regime. Tsai told TaiwanPlus he was arrested twice for political offenses, suffering torture and other human rights abuses at the hands of his captors. When he was set to be released, the authorities added another 3 years to his sentence. Collectively, Tsai spent 13 years behind bars.
这路无什么个人的感想，是安那无个人的感想，在威权统治之下，人民的权利并无受保障，连生命财产都无受保障的情形之下，人民哪有什么？
When Taiwan moved toward democracy in the 1990s, Tsai banded together with fellow White Terror survivors to call for transitional justice. They demanded recognition of what they had been through and accountability for the wrongs committed by the previous government. Taiwan was long denied this process because the Kuomintang, or KMT, continued to hold the presidency or legislature for 30 years after martial law was lifted in 1987. But in 2016, a new president was inaugurated who promised to carry out transitional justice. 2 terms and 8 years since, Tsai Ing-wen and her Democratic Progressive Party-led government have made several steps toward that goal. The most substantial, setting up the Transitional Justice Commission, a temporary cabinet-level body tasked with investigating White Terror-era incidents. Tsai's government also unsealed classified archives, removed symbols of Taiwan's authoritarian past, and gave former political prisoners a clean slate.
受害者的罪名大概有5900多件被撤销了，那所以他们得到完整的这个清白之身哦，然后司法上面的记录被涂销，并且在这个前提之下，他们的这个受损的权利，包括说过去被没收的土地哦，不动产这个部分也是过去法律没有处理的，在这一次都把它处理完。
Despite its progress on this issue, Tsai Ing-wen's government has also received sharp criticism, especially for its decision to also go after the KMT's assets, many of which were taken illegitimately when the party arrived in Taiwan from China in the 1940s. It was seen as an unfair partisan attack. Tsai's government was also faulted for not adequately educating the public on the need for transitional justice.
On the one hand, it has institutionalized the efforts to pursue transitional justice. But on the other hand, it failed to make the public has a more deliberative forum to talk about this kind of issues in Taiwanese society.
For those like Taekwan Yu, who suffered so much under martial law, the sting of those memories are now less painful in the comfort of their homes. But just outside, reminders of that period are still everywhere. Like the tens of thousands of statues of Taiwan's former president, Chiang Kai-shek, who many view as a brutal dictator. There's a huge memorial to him in Taipei, one of the city's most well-known landmarks, a sign of the challenges the DPP government has faced in ridding Taiwan of these markers.
那庆祝威权象征阻力还是蛮大，这个阻力当然是国民党。那最大的一个问题就是中正纪念堂。
Survivors of the White Terror say that the most important part of transitional justice is making sure those in power do not repeat the mistakes of the past, and bringing peace to society. Their hope that the outgoing president's efforts over the last 8 years will not have been in vain, and that the fight for truth and justice in Taiwan continues even after Tsai Ing-wen leaves office. Patrick Chen, Yu-Chen Lai, and Jeremy Olivier for TaiwanPlus.
Stay tuned all this week as we look back on the President Tsai Ing-wen's 8 years in office. A green sea turtle has been rescued off the southern coast of Taiwan. Divers found the turtle in the Hengchun area with its neck and front left limb tangled in discarded fishing line, hampering its ability to swim. The turtle has been taken to a rescue center for treatment, and its condition appears to be stable. Taiwanese inventors won the most awards at this year's World Genius Convention and Education Expo in Tokyo. Creators from Taiwan submitted 63 entries to the annual invention competition. They won 29 gold medals, 23 silver, and 6 special awards. One invention by 3 8th grade students got a gold medal as well as a special award. Having noticed overflowing trash cans in school and public bathrooms, the team, including a twin brother and sister, built a self-compressing garbage can.
在厕所常常会有卫生纸满出来掉到旁边地上不卫生的状况，
又可以压缩垃圾，又可以不需要改变你原本使用的方式，就是在垃圾桶的桶盖上面加装一个我们的压缩装置。
People around the world were treated to the sight of auroras this weekend, triggered by the largest solar storm in 2 decades. The northern lights could be seen as far as the U.S. state of Texas and northern China. Auroras occur when solar winds disturb the Earth's magnetic field and are usually only visible closer to the Earth's poles. Scientists say solar storms could disrupt power grids, and new tools are needed to prepare for them.
The power companies need to have ways to mitigate that impact. And luckily, the Space Weather Prediction Center has been working closely with the industry and regulators to help them understand what space weather is and to prepare for it.
Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. I'm Erika Liu. Take care and see you next time.